Thank you very much for joining us for this symposium and also for this specific talk. And part of the symposium, I will be talking about adaptive problem solving and the framework related to it. And adaptive problem solving actually will be a new domain in the second cycle of PIAAC. And that's why it might be interesting to actually look at where it is coming from and how it has been developed. The general background is that today's world is increasingly complex and dynamic, and we are faced with problem situations that are also dynamic and complex, and we often need to adapt our thinking and reasoning and our behaviors in order to deal with these problem-solving situations. And this idea of the relevance of problem solving was already part of the first PIAAC cycle, where problem solving in technology-rich environments, PS-TRE, was assessed, but there the focus was more on the one hand on the cognitive aspects and navigation aspects of problems that are specifically embedded in digital applications and environments. And now this has been kind of, let's say, revisited and also expanded in adaptive problem solving, where there is a stronger focus on the problem solving as such, not necessarily in technology-rich environments, and also with a stronger focus not only on the cognitive sides, but also on the metacognitive processes, which are in particular important when I have to adapt to new situations. Because then I kind of need to monitor and kind of, on a metacognitive level, take into account new information and adapt my problem-solving actions accordingly. Okay, so let's go through these points a little bit more in detail by starting basically that the relevance of adaptive problem solving also comes from empirical data, which basically shows that manual and routine tasks have been declining in relevance, and that other tasks that require more complex actions, partly also in groups, that's not necessarily part of the second cycle of PIAAC, but this kind of complex and adaptive task that is becoming increasingly relevant, and this is where adaptive problem solving comes in as a concept. So the underlying rationale is that over the years, our world changes and the tasks we are faced with changes, and this requires problem solving, or more specifically, adaptive problem solving. When we look at this a little bit more in detail, here are some key characteristics that are relevant for adaptive problems and the process of adaptive problem solving. So, for instance, when we encounter problems nowadays, we're often faced with challenges and impasses. We need to kind of seek out or realize that there are opportunities to solve the problem and take advantage of them. We need to manage much more as it was maybe 50 years ago. We need to manage resources. We need to constantly monitor as the problem situation evolves, as new information might come in, and as a consequence of all this, we might need to adapt our problem-solving behavior. So the key here is that it's important to quickly react and adapt to changes in the environment and in the problem situation. And that is what is basically at the heart of adaptive problem solving. And you will see this also in the definition that is put forward in the framework, where it basically states adaptive problem solving basically involves situations, dynamic situations, in which it's not immediately clear on how to reach a given goal. And then the process of adaptive problem solving requires to engage in cognitive and metacognitive processes to define the problem, search for information, and apply a solution. Those are three classical problem-solving processes, and that takes place in a wide variety of different information environments and contexts. Now, this is a very dense and at the same time comprehensive definition, and throughout the remainder of this presentation, I will look together with you at the different parts of this definition. The first aspect is the focus on cognitive skills, as it has also in other assessments been widely done. So to problem solving, there's always a strong cognitive dimension, but in adaptive problem solving, even more so on the metacognitive side, which basically means, many problem solving assessments, for instance, in the first cycle of PIAAC or in PISA 2012, they also have this metacognitive side in it, but it's not clearly represented in the tasks, and it's also not so strongly in the framework. So what we did in adaptive problem solving is that we clearly stress this is about cognitive dimensions, but also very clearly about metacognitive dimensions. Now, this aspect of the very broad definition and these cognitive and metacognitive skills then finally, you could say, cumulates in this overarching framework. And that's a bit the core of the framework, is that figure where you can see that, you know, the process of adaptive problem solving is taking place within the problem solver. It consists usually of 3 different stages or phases that you will find in the problem solving literature: definition, searching, and application. So you encounter a problem situation, you first need to define it, you then need to search for an appropriate solution, and then you need to apply this solution. Of course, you know, in reality, you will jump back and forth plenty of times in between these different stages or processes. Now, each of these stages has cognitive processes in it and metacognitive processes. And as mentioned before, this is kind of, you know, this distinction is very much in the focus of the framework, and it's also clearly represented in the items. And then this is all what happens inside, which is called the internal world here. But then, of course, the way this is done very much depends on the physical world, on the information environment, for instance, which could be physical, social, or digital, or also on the different contexts. Now, to get a better understanding of these different processes, both on the cognitive and metacognitive level, let's go through them by each stage, starting with the cognitive processes, and that will kind of be on the next slides. So when we look at defining, on the cognitive side, defining a problem, that basically means that, you know, you need to come up with a mental model of the problem situation. And in order to do so, you might need to retrieve relevant background information, for instance, information that is existing in your memory, or maybe also from the outside. And then what that is that you need usually, or at least that's often required in formal problem solving, is that you kind of create an external representation of your internal problem representation. You can keep this, of course, in working memory, but then this will kind of put a high load on working memory. So it's all about modeling and about making a model explicit when defining a problem situation. So that is kind of the core demand on the cognitive side. Now, when it then goes on to searching for a solution, it is basically about finding good ways, which is then called operators, both mentally, but also, of course, in the environment. I mean, problems can be very physical. And you need to kind of search for operators and then kind of also evaluate whether you can use these operators, and if so, how you can use them. So here, when we talk about searching for a solution on the cognitive side, it's basically about seeing what kind of operators do I have available, what can I do, and what is kind of the best fit to move towards the goal state, which is then, again, looking at the cognitive side about the application of a solution. And this basically means that, that you apply a plan and execute operators. Now, this is, as you can see, okay, basically, and you find this in different problem-solving frameworks in a similar way, these cognitive processes. But from here, we will now move on to the metacognitive side, which, of course, in all three stages, defining, searching, and application, is also very relevant to engage into successful problem solving. Let's start with defining. Here it is about goal setting. So what is the to be achieved state about? What, you know, how is it defined, and also what are different options? And basically, this means here coming up with where do I actually want to go? And also, of course, this is not assessed, but also, of course, you could think of emotional aspects that play a role here. Now, when I come up with a mental model, I need to supervise, basically. I need to monitor whether this model is in line with all the constraints and with the situation that is given, that I don't miss information, that I don't misinterpret information. So this is really a high-level process of monitoring problem comprehension. When it goes to the next stage, searching, the first question is that I need to evaluate which operators actually can be executed, which operators can be useful and which operators might not be useful. So this is about basically, again, on a meta level, to see which of the options is the best. Might even also mean, for instance, that I need to take a detour at first glance that then eventually will lead me quicker to the right solution. Moving on to the final stage of problem solving, the application, where also metacognitive processes play an important role, is of course that I need to monitor progress. And I need to do this throughout the entire application process. I need to see whether actually I'm moving towards a resolution of the problem, or whether suddenly maybe progress is not as good as quickly as expected, and I would need to adapt accordingly. I need to regulate the application of the different operators. And also, of course, I need to reflect on the overall solution process and basically also about my own capabilities to solve a problem. In kind of integrating this knowledge that I've gathered from this specific situation. Yeah, and this is here the overview of the metacognitive processes involved in adaptive problem solving. So again, to stress that briefly, the core idea is that there are 3 different stages of problem solving: defining, searching, and application. And in each of them, cognitive and metacognitive processes play a role. And it's always both. It's never, only in very exceptional cases, it's only one of the two. And then this kind of internal problem-solving process interacts with the situation, with real-world constraints, with information that is available, and so forth. Now, of course, all the items that I use, maybe what I can say is, as far as I've heard, that the scale functions well, which was good to learn. But of course, the items are highly secure. So I still brought 2 examples from the framework, which have been published, but which then obviously are not part of the assessment, but they kind of aim to demonstrate in particular this aspect of adaptive in the problem-solving process, because this is really at the core of what's new for this assessment. So kind of towards the end, please find 2 item examples. The first example is a dinner preparation example, and you might have seen some of, let's say, more or less similar tasks in other problem-solving assessments, where you basically, this is kind of a typical problem. You have different constraints, and it says it's 8 o'clock in the morning. You need to take your child first to school, and then go to a shop, and then be back home at 10. So there are different constraints, and you need to kind of satisfy these constraints. Here it is that you will need to go to school first, and then you need to be back at 10 o'clock. So plan the fastest route. Usually there is by now an automatic calculator included to kind of, not really assess arithmetics or math competency. And then, of course, what you can easily simulate in such a computer-based environment is that then you say, okay, and now there is suddenly coming a new constraint. For instance, that in the shop that would have previously been the optimal solution, no, the shop that we were previously supposed to go to, then it is closed. In this example, it says here you receive a news alert that your chosen shop has been closed due to water leakage. So now you need to kind of take this new information into consideration. You need to adapt your plan and implement a new plan. That would be a very simple example of what one could call an adaptive problem. This is the second example, which turned out to be very complex, or too complex actually, because it requires, reading up a lot of information and so many numbers and tables that it wasn't included in the actual assessment. But of course, it can again demonstrate the principle of kind of real-time adaptive problems in a way, and that is basically the stock market, where you kind of have a situation and then you need to make some buying decisions, and then this situation changes. It's not demonstrated here, but of course, in principle, it changes continuously. So then you have a new situation, and suddenly maybe you should buy other stocks or you should sell other stocks. So this is also one of the typical examples where you kind of, all these aspects of adaptive problem solving would be relevant here, that you constantly monitor, that you adapt your behaviors, and you do so quickly. You need to do so quickly and efficiently. Yeah, that is it. I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm very much interested to hear what you think about the idea of adaptive problem solving, whether you think this assessment actually can add something to the assessment in addition to literacy and numeracy. And yeah, I would be very happy to hear your thoughts, both on the frameworks and the items, and to enter into discussion with you. Thank you very much for your attention.